Hi, I'm Sandra Mogensen. Welcome to this presentation about intermediate level rep for piano composed by women born between the 17th and 19th centuries. I will be introducing 20 pieces at approximately levels 5 to 8, composed by 20 important composers of piano music. Please take note of each of their names so that you can research each of them more fully, and as well so that you can complete the word search that I've made for you found in your Summer Sizzle handbook. Please email a photo of your completed puzzle and I will send you further resources of interest on the topic of women who composed. By the way, all of the pieces in this presentation can be heard in their entirety on the Piano Music She Wrote YouTube channel. So our first composer today is Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, born in France in the 17th century. She was hugely celebrated during her time. She was born into a family of musicians, and she luckily had support from her family to pursue her musical education. And already at the age of 5, she performed at Versailles and eventually did become a musician in the court there under Louis XIV. She married an organist named Marin de la Guerre, and she continued her music teaching, composing, and performing. Her first published work is actually one of the very few works published in France at that time, and that was her first book of her pièces de clavecin. She also composed a ballet, an opera, cantatas, songs, and many other pieces. Maria Teresa Agnesi was known as a singer, a harpsichordist, and a composer. She was quite well known and celebrated. She had quite a large output, including 6 operas, lots of keyboard and vocal works, and many of her pieces were performed during her lifetime. So let's listen to the beginning of part of her harpsichord sonata in F major. Although her name is very Italian, Elisabetta de Gambarini was in fact an English composer. And not only that, she was well known as a singer, a keyboard player, a conductor, and a painter. And she also was the first English woman to have a collection of her keyboard music published, the 6 sets of lessons for the harpsichord. This next piece that you're going to hear comes from that selection. Let's listen to part of the Opus 1, number 1, harpsichord sonata in G. Hélène Montgeroult, sometimes known as Hélène de Montgeroult, was an important French composer of the late 18th century, early 19th century. Her teachers included Clementi, and she was the first female to receive an appointment to teach at the Paris Conservatoire. She was incredible as a pedagogue, put together piano methods, and this study that we're about to hear is from an amazing, wonderful collection of studies. I only wish I had known about them much earlier in my life. Annabon is sometimes known as Annabon di Venezia, Annabon of Venice. She came from a very artistic, cultured family. Her parents, in fact, worked in the court of the Esterházys. She wrote some keyboard music. She's written some flute sonatas that are quite well known even to this day. And unfortunately, some of her music, including her opera, the score has been lost. But let's listen to part of her harpsichord sonata in C major, just the beginning of it. Jane Savage, again an 18th century English composer. Her father was also a composer, and she was quite well known as not only a composer but also a harpsichordist, and she had several of her works published during her lifetime. It's been recently discovered that she composed an anthem for the Church of England, and this is one of the earliest known such things composed by a woman. And we're going to listen to a little bit of her sonata in G major. This is the rondo from the third movement. I think it's just an incredibly fun piece. Although her name is not Scottish, Sophia Dussek was in fact a Scottish composer, and not only that, but a singer, a pianist, and a harpist. She also came from a musical family and also had a father who was a composer. In her teens, quite early in her life, she moved to London to study music, and she performed there as a singer, and in fact sang under the director Franz Joseph Haydn. She was also a big fan and proponent of Mozart's music. She married the composer Jan Dussek, who we know from some of the sonatinas that we may have taught. There is, in fact, a little question as to whether all of those sonatinas were, in fact, written by Jan or were they written by Sophia. She was also quite a pedagogue, a piano teacher, and she started her own school of music. You'll find several of her compositions are not only for keyboard but for harp, and possibly harp and keyboard. This next piece that you're going to hear, it's called the New German Waltz. And again, I just find this piece so fun to play. So I recommend you introduce it to your students. It's about a grade 6 level. Louise Farrenc, born at the very beginning of the 19th century, was a composer, a teacher, and a great pianist. She, like so many of these women, was kind of a superstar in her own time. She began piano studies at an early age with Ignaz Moscheles and Johann Nepomuk Hummel, and she studied composition with Anton Reicher. When she was 17, she married a flutist, performing with him. And after they raised their daughter, or I guess she raised her daughter, more like it probably, she was actually appointed to the Paris Conservatoire, and there she taught piano for 30 years. Although for much of that time she was paid significantly less than the men in the same position. So after she had one of her compositions performed by the famous violinist Joseph Joachim, she demanded and did receive equal pay. So she was well ahead of her time in that way. She and her husband put together a 23-volume set of books about piano and keyboard and harpsichord playing, and included in that are collections of etudes. And again, I love these studies. They're progressive in taking us through several levels. And again, I really wish I had known about these studies much, much earlier in my life. They are wonderful. So here's one of them, etude in A-flat major, number 13 from Opus 50. Emilie Mayer, again born in the early 19th century, a German composer. We don't know much about her early days, but we do know that she studied composition with Karl Löwe. She moved to Berlin in her 30s, and she began putting on concerts of her own works. She composed 8 symphonies and many other orchestral works, chamber music, solo piano works, and lieder, songs for voice and piano. So she was no slouch. She received the Gold Medal of Art from the Queen of Prussia, and not only that, but she was appointed the co-director of the Berlin Opera. Let's listen to 2 of her 6 pieces for children, Opus 48. Marguerite Balutet is a wonderful French composer born in mid-19th century. She didn't get a lot of support from her family in her early studies. However, she did get a chance to enter the Conservatoire de Paris and study with Félix Lecoupé, and harmony she studied with Augustin Savard. So she did give concerts, but eventually became much more interested in teaching not only piano but also solfège. And she eventually became the founder of her own music school, which she cleverly called L'École Beethoven. I guess good marketing with that name. This school was specifically for young girls to receive a proper musical education. And she had illustrious other musicians. Many of them are known to us still, including Fauré and Vierne. They taught pedagogy there, theory, history, analysis, solfège, of course. And she was quite the going concern as far as piano pedagogy in Paris in her day. Her pieces for piano students are fantastic all around. So definitely seek her out and share that music with your students. Cécile Chaminade is one of the more famous of the women that I'm presenting to you here today. She was actually a superstar in her day, both as pianist and composer. Queen Victoria was very keen about her, and the opera composer Ambroise Thomas said of her, "This is not a woman who composes, but a composer who is a woman." So, yes, Cécile Chaminade, she had an international performing career and a very prolific composing career. Much of her output was piano pieces and songs for voice and piano. She was the first female composer to win the Légion d'honneur, a very famous high honor in France. Let's listen to one of her pieces for children. This is called Villanelle. Mel Bonis was a very important French composer. Sometimes you might hear her referred to as Mélanie Bonis, but she was quite adamant that she wanted to be called Mel Bonis. So she did not get a great amount of support from her family as a young child. So she taught herself piano, and finally at age 12 she was allowed to get proper lessons. And when she was 16, she finally was given the opportunity to study at the Paris Conservatoire. And along with her classmate was Claude Debussy. She studied with César Franck. So she had quite a tumultuous personal life. Her parents made her get married to a middle-class businessman, and during the time she was married to him, there was not much music in her life, but she did have an affair that began, I think, during her conservatoire days with a poet. And yeah, that was pretty tumultuous. And she, in fact, bore him a child while married to the businessman guy. So yes, quite a dramatic life. Very prolific again, many pieces, gorgeous pieces for piano, chamber music, orchestra, some songs, and yes, a very important composer. So here's another French composer. So many illustrious women who composed that were born in that period. Chaminade in 1857, Bonis in 1858, and Chrétien in 1859. She entered the Paris Conservatoire as a teenager at age 15, and there she studied theory and composition, as well as organ and piano. She was appointed at age 30 to teach solfège at the Conservatoire, and that was an honor. However, she chose to quit that after a couple of years because she wanted to focus on her composing. So again, a prolific composer, many piano pieces, and many of them for pedagogical purposes for students. As well, she wrote orchestral works, chamber works, 2 operas, and 50 songs. And she was very celebrated in her day. So lots of great music by Hedwige Chrétien for you to check out and to share with your students. And let us hear a little bit of her berceuse. Severine Lindeman was one of many illustrious women composers from Norway. For such a small population, I believe there were maybe 1 million people at the beginning of the 1800s. Norway had an incredible number of women who composed. And Anna Lindeman was from quite a musical family, especially her aunts and her uncle, and her cousin as well, who she married. They lived in Oslo, and then they lived in Dresden, Germany for a little while. And when they returned to Oslo, they started a music school together, which still exists to this day. She was, again, quite prolific in composing many, many piano pieces, chamber music, songs. And she wrote very interesting kind of character pieces. And this next one that you're going to hear is called Going Home, I think is the translation. So to me, it's like you're getting out of school at the end of the day and you can't wait to get home, so you run. And wonderful pieces. I really urge you to check her music out. It's wonderful all around. Margaret Ruthven Lang was an important American composer born in the same year as Amy Beach. I unfortunately have no pieces by Amy Beach in this presentation, but you've no doubt come across her through some of the RCM or other sources. So anyway, Margaret Ruthven Lang, she came from a very musical family, and in fact took her first piano lessons from one of her father's students, and then studied also directly with her father. And she also took up the violin, and as a well-traveled family, she got a chance to study violin in Munich, where she also studied composition. She happened to also study composition with the famous American composer Edward MacDowell. She had some of her works performed in major settings. One opportunity she had was by the Boston Symphony Orchestra, performing her dramatic overture. Ruthven Lang is known for her songs. She wrote over 200 songs for voice and piano. So a very devoted composer throughout her life, a very long life. She lived past the age of 100. So let's listen now to a little piece called Rondoletto from her Opus 60. Elena Gnesina was a Russian composer, born in 1874, lived a long life, and gave a lot to the musical culture of Moscow. She came from a musical family with a mother as a singer and pianist. She attended Moscow Conservatory, where she studied piano, and with her two sisters, and I believe a brother as well, she started a music school in Moscow, which is still active to this day, quite an important and influential music school. She wrote quite a bit of pedagogical material for piano students and piano teachers, and this next piece that you're going to hear is an interesting little foray into contrapuntal playing, and it's called Two Cry Babies, and it's very, very lovely character piece. Charlotte Zoe, again a French composer, slightly more modern than the others that I spoke of. She, of course, like many of these women, used a male name. Charles Soy, or just Ch. She had organ lessons with Louis Vierne and composition with Vincent Bendy. She has quite an output, and when I first encountered her music, say 3 years ago, there was very little information available about her. But in the intervening years, over the pandemic, her grandson, François-Henri Labbé, has taken on the task of preparing her manuscripts and going through her letters and all that sort of thing and publishing them. And he's quite willing to help and to share what he is doing there to get her music out into the world. So one only wishes that every one of these women composers has some kind of descendant that takes this effort in putting things together for publication and for recording and such like that. So here is a lovely piece called Au Soleil from her set of 6 pieces. Dora Pejacevic, a Croatian composer, is quite an important composer in 20th century music, and you can find out quite a bit about her and hear quite a bit of her music that's been recorded if you just Google around a bit. She began to compose already at age 12, and in fact this piece that you are about to hear, her Berceuse, was written at that age. So a very prolific and very important composer, Dora Pejacevic. Florence Price was a very important American composer of the 20th century. You've probably heard of her. You probably are familiar with her music. She has become very well known in the last few years. If you feel like you'd like to know more about her, I think there's lots on the internet that you can look up, and there are recordings of her music. I'd in particular recommend that you listen to Yannick Nézet-Séguin's recording with the Philadelphia Orchestra of her symphonies. Incredible composer. She endured a lot, but she did have some successes with her music being performed, for example, by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra during her lifetime, which was not the usual for an African-American composer, a female one at that. So I'd like you to listen now to this lovely little piece called The Goblin and the Mosquito There are many pieces that she wrote for piano students, as she did a lot of piano teaching herself. So a really great resource, and her music is now getting published, more and more of it. So enjoy the music here of Florence Price. So here we have Laure Choisy, and you can see that we know very little about her. She was potentially Swiss, although she could well have been French. Although she died not that long ago, in 1960, for some reason, information about her is scant. So this is a problem over the whole area of women who composed. There are many composers for whom we have next to no information. At least we know her birth date and death date, and that she was a violinist. That is something. But there are many composers for whom we don't even have that information, and yet we can see that they were wonderful composers, because luckily we have a score or two from these women. So here's a beautiful little piece called a True Story, and it's from a collection of 6 little pieces, and they're all fantastic and well worth your exploring. All right, thank you. Here is Une histoire vraie, or a true story. So that brings us to the end of these 20 pieces that I promised you, and I hope you've enjoyed them and that your interest is kindled to look further into these women. You can find recordings of all of these pieces, as I said, at the Piano Music She Wrote YouTube channel. Please do be in touch with me if you have any questions at all, or just want to tell me about the successes you've had with your students looking into some of this repertoire. Here's my email address once again, moganpianist@gmail.com. Thank you again.